Most men think attraction is built through words, the right compliment, the perfect message, that one clever line that makes her smile. But here's the uncomfortable truth. None of that is what actually stays with her. A touch lasting just a few seconds can create a stronger emotional imprint than an entire evening of conversation. Not because it's romantic, but because it speaks directly to the brain in a language words simply can't compete with. And yet, this is exactly where most men get it wrong. They either avoid touch completely, afraid of doing the wrong thing, or they rush it, making it feel awkward, forced, or worse, unwelcome. What they don't realize is this. It's not whether you touch. It's how, when, and why you do it. There are specific types of touch that quietly build comfort, trust, and attraction beneath the surface. And there are others that instantly shut everything down without her ever saying a word. That's why you'll sometimes see one man effortlessly create a deep connection, while another who says all the right things still ends up hearing, "I just don't feel it." The difference isn't luck, it's awareness. There was a fascinating behavioral study where strangers were asked to communicate emotions without speaking, without facial expressions, only through brief physical contact. Shockingly, people could correctly identify feelings like care, appreciation, and even affection most of the time. Think about that. No words, no explanations, just touch, and the message still landed. Now imagine what happens when that kind of communication is intentional. Because here's something most people won't say out loud. A woman who's experienced enough, who's heard every line, seen every gesture, and learned to read between them, doesn't respond to effort alone anymore. She responds to feeling. And the fastest way to create that feeling isn't louder words, it's quieter signals. But before we go further, there's something important you need to understand. Two of the touches I'm about to show you will seem so simple, so ordinary, that you might be tempted to ignore them. That would be a mistake, because those simple ones are often the ones that create the deepest emotional reactions, the kind she can't even fully explain. And the final one? It's so powerful that relationship experts actually recommend it to couples who are on the verge of falling apart. So if you think this is just about attraction, you're missing the bigger picture. Because the first touch we're about to break down doesn't just create interest, it changes how she feels about your presence entirely. And once that shift happens, everything else becomes easier. But here's the real question. What's the one small move that can instantly make her feel safe, seen, and unexpectedly drawn to you without saying a single word? The first touch doesn't look impressive. In fact, most people wouldn't even notice it happening. And that's exactly why it works. It's what I call the guiding touch. A gentle placement of your hand on her lower back when you're walking together, moving through a doorway, or standing close in a crowded space. Simple, right? But here's what makes it powerful. The lower back isn't just another random spot. It's one of the most sensitive and awareness-heavy areas of the body. A calm, steady hand placed there sends a signal that bypasses overthinking and goes straight to instinct. But, and this is where most men mess it up, execution matters more than intention. A quick tap feels dismissive, too much pressure, feels controlling, too hesitant, feels uncertain. But when it's done slowly, naturally, with just enough presence to be felt without forcing it, it creates something very specific. It tells her, I'm aware of you. I've got you. Not in a possessive way, not in a showy way, just quietly. And that quiet confidence is what makes the difference. Because here's something people rarely talk about. Many women, especially those who've been independent for a long time, are used to handling everything themselves. Making decisions, carrying responsibilities, staying composed even when things feel overwhelming. So when someone introduces a moment, even a small one, where she can briefly not carry all that, it stands out. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's rare. There's a subtle emotional shift that happens in that moment. She may not consciously analyze it, but internally something registers. This feels different. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. If that first touch creates comfort, the second one builds connection. And it's something almost everyone does, but very few people do well. Holding hands sounds basic, almost forgettable. But there's a version of it that completely changes how it's experienced. Instead of just holding her hand casually, you bring your other hand in, lightly enclosing hers between both of yours. Now you're not just holding hands, you're creating a moment of focus. This works because it signals something deeper than physical contact. It signals presence. Your attention isn't divided. You're not halfway there. You're fully engaged in that moment with her. And in a world where attention is constantly pulled in 10 different directions, that kind of presence hits harder than people expect. Especially for someone who's used to being around others who are physically there, but mentally somewhere else. When she feels that difference even briefly, it creates contrast. And contrast is what makes moments memorable. But here's the part most people don't realize. Once her mind starts labeling you as different, it doesn't easily go back. Which brings us to the third touch, the one that catches most people completely off guard. It's more intimate, more still, and far more revealing than anything we've talked about so far. And if you don't understand the timing of this one, you won't just lose the moment. You might create the exact opposite effect. The third touch isn't loud. It doesn't draw attention. And if you rush it, even slightly, it loses all its impact. But when it happens at the right time, it creates a moment she doesn't forget. It's the forehead connection. Not a kiss, not playful, not performative. Just a quiet moment where your forehead gently rests against hers. Close enough that everything else fades into the background. It might sound simple, but psychologically, it carries weight. Because this kind of closeness requires something most people avoid without even realizing it. Stillness. No distractions. No talking to fill the silence. No nervous jokes to break the tension. Just presence. And that's exactly why it stands out. Most interactions today are filled with movement, noise, and constant stimulation. People rarely slow down long enough to actually feel a moment. So when you create one, without forcing it, it immediately feels different. There's also something else happening beneath the surface. When two people allow that level of closeness without pulling away, it signals comfort, but also trust. Not the kind that's spoken about, but the kind that's felt in real time. And for someone who has built emotional boundaries over time, that kind of moment doesn't go unnoticed. It doesn't demand anything. It doesn't escalate. It simply says, right now, I'm here with you. And sometimes that's more powerful than any grand gesture, but here's where most people get it wrong. They rush out of the moment, they break it too quickly, laugh it off, or shift into something more obvious because the silence feels unfamiliar. And in doing that, they miss the entire point. Because the power of this touch isn't just in starting it. It's in holding it just long enough for the feeling to settle. Now, If that moment builds emotional closeness, the next touch introduces something more complex. It's not just about comfort anymore. It blends two signals that rarely show up together: trust and tension. And when those two combine, the effect becomes significantly stronger. This is the back of the neck touch, a subtle placement of your hand near the nape of her neck, usually when you're already close, maybe sitting side by side or leaning in during a conversation. This area is naturally sensitive, not just physically, but psychologically. It's a place people don't easily expose unless they feel safe. So when contact happens there and it feels natural, not forced, it creates an immediate internal response. Her mind processes it quickly. Is this comfortable? Does this feel right? Do I trust this moment? If the answer is yes, even unconsciously, something shifts. The emotional intensity increases, but without losing the sense of ease. And that combination is rare, because most interactions lean too far one way, either safe and predictable or intense and overwhelming. This sits right in between. But timing is everything here. Done too early, it feels intrusive. Done too late, it loses its effect, which is why understanding progression matters more than memorizing the touch itself. Because each moment we've talked about is building towards something. And what comes next might seem even smaller than all of these. But it's the one that quietly works in the background, without her even realizing why she feels closer to you. And once you understand this next detail, you'll start noticing how the smallest movements can create the strongest emotional pull. By now, you've probably noticed a pattern. None of these moments rely on big gestures. Nothing dramatic, nothing over the top. And yet, each one creates a shift. But the next touch is different because it's so subtle. It often goes completely unnoticed. Not by her feelings, but by her awareness. It's what I call the micro stroke. This usually happens when you're already in contact, holding her hand, resting your hand on her arm, or sitting close enough that your hands naturally meet. And then, without making it obvious, your thumb begins to move, slowly, lightly, almost absent-mindedly, back and forth. No announcement, no eye contact to highlight it, no break in conversation. Just a small, steady motion that feels natural, not intentional. And that's exactly why it works, because the brain responds differently to this kind of touch. Slow, gentle movement across the skin activates emotional processing in a way that static contact doesn't. It creates a sense of warmth, familiarity, and closeness without demanding attention. In other words, it doesn't ask her to feel something. It just creates the space for it to happen. And here's the interesting part. Because it feels so natural, she's less likely to analyze it. She won't sit there thinking, why does this feel different? She'll just notice that being around you feels easier, more comfortable, more engaging, slightly harder to pull away from. That's the effect. Not overwhelming, not obvious, just quietly building. And often that's far more powerful than anything that tries too hard to stand out. Now here's where things shift again. Up until now, every touch has been about creating connection in small, contained moments. But the next one changes something bigger. It's no longer just about how she feels in the moment. It's about how she starts to see her place next to you. This is the silent pull. You're sitting beside her or standing close. And without saying anything, you gently draw her closer. Maybe your arm moves around her shoulders. Maybe your hand finds her waist and closes the distance. No words, no build-up, just a natural movement that reduces the space between you. And that space matters more than people realize. Because distance, physical distance, often reflects emotional distance. So when you close that gap without hesitation, it sends a very clear signal. I want you closer. Not because you're trying to impress her, not because you're following a script, but because in that moment, it feels right. And when something feels unforced, it feels real. For someone who's used to overthinking interactions, reading mixed signals, or wondering where they stand, that kind of clarity stands out. It removes doubt. And instead of questioning the moment, she settles into it. But here's the detail most people miss. It's not just about pulling her closer. It's about how natural it feels when you do. If there's hesitation, it breaks the flow. If there's force, it creates resistance. But when it happens smoothly, almost instinctively, it feels like the most normal thing in the world. And that's what makes it powerful. Because now, being close to you doesn't feel like a decision. It feels like the default. But there's still one final piece. One last moment that ties everything together, not just attraction, not just connection, but something deeper. It's the one that doesn't just create a feeling, it changes her entire state. And if you get this last one right, it's not just memorable. It's something she'll associate with you long after the moment ends. Everything we've talked about so far builds toward this. The subtle signals, the quiet moments, the gradual shift from curiosity to comfort, to connection. But the final touch does something different. It doesn't just create attraction, it creates relief. And that's something far more powerful. This is the extended embrace. Not the quick, polite hug people exchange out of habit. Not the half-second contact followed by a step back. A real one, both arms, no rush, no distraction, and most importantly, you don't let go too soon. At first it might feel like nothing special, but then something changes. A few seconds pass, and instead of pulling away, you stay. Another few seconds, and her body begins to relax. Her breathing slows, her posture softens, and without saying a word, her guard starts to drop. Because here's what most people don't realize. A longer hug gives the nervous system time to shift. From alert to calm. From guarded to open. It creates a moment where she doesn't have to think, perform, or respond. She can just exist without pressure. And for someone who's used to holding everything together, mentally, emotionally, even socially, that moment hits deeper than you'd expect. It's not about excitement. It's about finally feeling at ease. Now here's where it becomes even more meaningful. When you don't rush to end the hug, it communicates something very specific. I'm not in a hurry to leave this moment. And that message lands. Because most interactions today feel rushed, timed, measured. People are present, but only halfway. So when someone takes their time without needing to say anything, it creates contrast. And like we said before, contrast is what makes moments stick. But there's an important detail here. You're not holding on tightly. You're not forcing the moment to last. You're simply allowing it. And when she's ready to pull away, that's when it ends. Not before. That's what makes it feel safe. That's what makes it feel real. And that's what makes it memorable. Because long after the conversation fades, after the details blur, what she remembers isn't what you said. It's how she felt in that moment. Calm, comfortable, understood. Maybe even a little surprised by how easy it felt to just be there. And here's the part most people overlook. None of these touches require perfect timing, status, or some rehearsed version of confidence. They require awareness, patience, and the ability to actually be present instead of trying to impress. But there's one more layer to this that most men completely miss. Because connection isn't just about what you do. It's also about recognizing what she is already showing you. The subtle signals, the small shifts in her behavior, the moments where she's already leaning in without making it obvious. Most people miss those signs entirely and then wonder why the moment slipped away. So the real question is, if she was already showing interest, would you even recognize it before it's too late? By now, you understand something most people don't. Attraction isn't built through effort alone. It's built through awareness, through timing, through presence, through the ability to notice what's happening beneath the surface. But here's where everything either comes together or completely falls apart. Because even if you do everything right, every touch, every moment, every shift in energy, it won't matter if you miss her signals. And most men do. Not because they're incapable, but because they're looking in the wrong place. They expect obvious signs, clear words, direct confirmation. But that's rarely how it shows up. Instead, interest reveals itself in smaller ways. Subtle changes, almost unnoticeable unless you know what to look for. For example, she doesn't pull away from your touch. She lingers in it. Not dramatically, not in a way that calls attention, just a fraction of a second longer than necessary. That pause, it matters. Or she closes the distance herself. You didn't pull her closer this time, but somehow she ends up sitting nearer than before. That's not random. That's comfort turning into intention. Sometimes it's even quieter than that. Her body relaxes more around you than it did earlier. Her movements slow down. She becomes less guarded, less reactive, more present. These aren't things she announces. They're things she allows. And allowance is a powerful indicator. Because when someone feels unsure, they create space. But when they feel safe, they remove it. Now here's where most people go wrong. They hesitate. They second guess the moment. They wait for something more obvious and more certain, more undeniable. And in doing that, they miss the window completely. Because attraction doesn't wait around for perfect clarity. It moves in real time, and if you don't move with it, it fades just as quietly as it appeared. But there's another layer to this. Something even more important than recognizing her signals. It's what you do after you notice them. Because responding too aggressively can break the moment. But doing nothing at all can lose it. The balance is subtle. You meet her energy without overpowering it. You match the moment without rushing ahead of it. And when that balance is right, everything feels natural, unforced, like it's unfolding on its own. That's when connection starts to deepen without resistance. That's when she stops analyzing and starts feeling. And once someone shifts into that state, logic takes a back seat, because now it's no longer about deciding whether she likes you. It's about experiencing what it feels like when she's around you. But here's the final piece most people never fully understand. Attraction isn't something you create out of nowhere. It's something you either build or interrupt. Every action either moves things forward or quietly pulls them back. There's no neutral. And the men who get this right, they're not guessing. They're simply paying attention and responding at the right time. So now you know the touches. You understand the moments. And you can recognize the signals. But there's still one question left. When the moment actually comes, will you trust yourself enough to act on it? Or will you hesitate just long enough to lose it?